one of the toughest scriptures that I've ever read as a young Christian to be able to try to understand. Luke chapter 25, starting verse,
I stole it.
or I'm sorry, 14, starting at 25. Just read about 3 verses and settle on that for a few minutes. And there were a great multitude with him, and he turned and said unto them, If any man come to me, hate not his father, his mother, and his wife, and children, brethren, sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me, notice he said, come to me, but now he's saying, come after me, not be my disciple. A few years ago, I struggled with that. Take your mom and dad, that's the greatest treasures God's given me, and my wife. And you're asking me to do that. That was confusing to me.
Yeah.
We'll get to that here in a few minutes. So the title of the lesson is Counting the Cost of Discipleship. You may ask, what is a disciple? What's it mean to be a disciple? The word disciple means learner. You can be a disciple of anyone, but to be a disciple of Jesus Christ and what he teaches, you have to be like him. You have to be, and if you're going to be a disciple, you learn from your teacher. And if you're learning from Jesus, you want to be like Jesus. Remember, he says, come to me, and then he says, come after me. It's a tough question, but if I were to ask or survey the church and say, would you like to be a disciple of Christ? You've got to be careful how you answer that. It's not as easy as you think. Discipleship costs. Zach said the other day, salvation's free, discipleship costs. And there's a price to pay for it. Don't get me wrong, it pays to serve Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Pays every day, pays in every way, pays every step of the way, but it also costs. So the crowds were following Jesus, as verse 25 said. Jesus had a great multitude of people following. He was at the zenith of his career, of his ministry. People were clamoring after him, following him everywhere. So what does he do? He says, hate not your father and your mother, your wife, sister, and brother, your own life. You can't be my disciple. What's Jesus do here? There's everybody following him. And everybody follows different people for different reasons. Could have been the miracles. Could have been to get a free meal. I don't know. But when Jesus said, come after me, bear your cross, hate not or hate your father and your mother, wife, sister, mother, he thins out the crowd. That's what he did. He turns to them, and in the strongest, sternest terms possible, he talks to them about something that seems so shocking, and says, if any man come after me, hate not his father and mother, and so on, he can't be my disciple. Folks, there's no fine print in that. No fine print in that. Jesus never watered down the gospel of getting more followers. When you follow Jesus, he's not only asking you to follow him in his popularity, but he's asking you to follow him in his unpopularity. 4 things a true disciple of Jesus Christ is, some I want to lay on your heart. Jesus wants disciples that will worship at any cost. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and so forth and so on, and whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Jesus is saying he must become before personal relationships. He's saying if any man come after me and hate not his mother and father and sister, cannot be my disciple. That's ironic, isn't it? Because after all, Jesus in his teaching teaches us to love. It's one of his commandments. And Jesus isn't breaking the commandment to honor the father and mother, as it states in Ephesians 6:2, or hate her children. Because like I said, my family's they're the treasures of my life. He's just saying that he has to come before any personal relationship. Richard, you love Pammy, don't you?
Yes.
But you love the Lord.
Yes, sir.
He's number one in your life.
Yes, sir.
She's number two.
Yes.
But can't you love her more by loving Jesus and making him number one?
Yes, sir.
Me, I can too.
Yep.
One of the things that I struggled with in my early, and still do sometimes, you must love Jesus more than your own personal reputation. You gotta stop worrying about what other people think about you. It's not about fulfilling yourself. So now Jesus starts to talk about a cross. A cross is not a thing of beauty. A cross sometimes is something that people wear on their neck. It's pretty on your neck. But I heard Zach several years ago, and it put it in perspective to me. It's an emblem of shame and suffering.
Yep.
And really, if you think about it, it's no different than wearing an electric chair on your neck. It's really not.
A lethal injection needle.
Yes.
Yeah.
A cross is something that you must be willing to take up. You don't have to bear it on your own, but you gotta at least take it up. I read where someone asked a great theologian, Dr. Tozer, what's it mean to take up your cross and be crucified with Christ? He said there's three things. He said a man who is crucified is only facing one way. He's not looking back. A man who is crucified is not going back. And a man who is crucified with Christ has no further plans of his own. That's really true. And that's how it should be. When I made the decision, when I come through that door almost 8 years ago, when the Holy Spirit hit me and gave an invitation before church got started, I didn't know it then, but I'm learning it now. That should have been the last decision I made on my own. Was when I came to the altar. Every other decision should come by Him.
Amen.
A disciple must not only worship at any cost, but he must also work at any cost. Richard mentioned the Duncans a while ago. And everybody knows what's happened to my family over the past few weeks. You gotta worship through suffering. I listened to Hoy Duncan preach a message last week. And it's about suffering, how to view our sufferings. And he was talking about his dad and mom. And I thought of mine, thought of my preacher. He talked about everybody in here that knows Roger Duncan, undoubtedly one of the sweetest old men and preachers that I've ever had the opportunity to meet. That man, I truly believe that man could read the phone book and you get a blessing out of it. But he said he had to take he drove his mom and dad to the doctor. I think it was last week, the week before. His dad's health continues to fail. He said he got up to the doctor and she asked Roger, what's wrong with you? He said, well, I'm battling leukemia. He said, since 1990 or 91, I've had Parkinson's disease. I've got diabetes. And he said, and I'm getting weak. But he raised his hand and said, but I don't want you to think I'm complaining.
Oh, the best is yet to come.
So I don't want you to think I'm complaining because God's been good to me. There's a man that's truly been sick and has never faltered, still makes his way down to West Virginia from Florida. That's discipleship. And that's what he teaches.
What he can't no longer even do his job.
No. So then the Bible's in verse 28, for which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he hath sufficient to finish. Lest happily he begins to lay the foundation and is unable to finish, and all that behold him begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and is not able to finish. What's he mean here?
Yeah.
Why does he mention a tower? Because in Bible days, there were big vineyards. And in the center of those big vineyards, they built towers. Built high towers. And they set a watchman up on top of it. And they protected the vineyards from thieves, from animals. So that tower was put there to be fruitful.
Yep.
There was a purpose. God's saying that our lives ought to be like a tower. So he first spoke of a crucifixion, but now he's speaking of a construction. Jesus has called us to build. Our life is to be constructed out of his plan, not ours. Jesus says you're going to build a tower, you got to count the cost. He said if you're going to be a disciple, count the cost. He said you got to count the cost to be able to finish the tower. Does anybody in here want to be a half-built tower? You can see a lot further off from a completed tower. So why does Christ want you to count the cost? Man, I've seen it. Because a false profession damages the church, damages the kingdom of heaven. A false profession causes the world to mock Christian people, call us hypocrites. It causes discouragement in the church, and it hampers the ministry. Since I am so grieved to lose my nephew.
Push Andy.
But the Lord works in mysterious ways. When Richard preached his funeral, 10 or 11 people raised their hand to claim salvation that day. That's worth it. And since then, I've had the opportunity to talk to a couple people from family, their side of the family, or my in-laws, about church. And one of them talked about this, about one of the things that they've always looked at upon the church. And she pointed out that one of the reasons they went to church before, but they look around and see what things people do, and it kind of made them backslide. And you can't blame nobody else. That's on your own. And I know that Richard gave counsel to that person, and it sounds just like Richard would say, and I agree with him. I would rather go to church with a couple hypocrites than be in hell with all of them. And that struck home to that person, and I won't mention their name. But I truly think they'll be in this church here before long. And it was good counsel. Verse 31, or what king going to war make war against another king, sitteth not down first and consulteth whether he be able to with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000. The king being attacked only had 10,000 soldiers. The marching king had 20,000 soldiers. So the defending king had to first sit down and think about his resources, but not only his resources, he's got to think about the consequences. There's always consequences in battle. King had to sit down and think about the loss of life, the loss of property, even if he did win. Because sometimes even when you win the victory, you're still going to lose personal things. Some things will be taken away from you. The king had to think about whether he should fight the battle or whether he should surrender. And I like this. Or else, in verse 32, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage and desireth conditions of peace. When you're at war, are you going to make peace with the enemy? In a Christian life, who's the enemy? If you can't count the cost, are you going to send an advocate to make peace with Satan? You'll never win. substitute for victory in our life. Verse 33, so likewise whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, and he cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? Now he's talking about salt. He first spoke of a crucifixion, then a construction. He spoke of a conflict and war. Now he's speaking of a commission. Because he says we're like salt. He said we're the salt of the earth. I want to tell you a few things about what salt does. Richard preached this message several years ago that I listened to. Salt, first of all, preserves. Salt tastes bad when you don't have it. That may not make sense. There's a few foods, if you think about, if you're like me, I cannot eat without salt. The very second, whether it's fried, whether it's scrambled, whether it's boiled, that I put egg in my mouth without salt, I'll gag.
Yeah.
And while I don't like to admit to eating French fries, I shouldn't be eating them. I got in a hurry the other day, and I got them, and I'm sitting in my vehicle, and I'm trying to drive, and I got a 96-pound shepherd behind me that's nudging me. He's wanting to eat too. I picked up a couple of those fries. They had no salt on them. I couldn't eat them. French fries are great with salt, but they're very underwhelming without salt. These will enjoy the whole thing of fries. Salt, it preserves. Do you have salt, or are you bland and tasteless? Why would anyone, and I've heard Richard say this, why would anyone want to have what we have if we're always going around and complaining about something? You got to make it work for them. Paul said in Colossians 4:6, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt. Salt seasons, salt heals,
Yep.
salt's an antiseptic.
Yep.
And our world needs salt. It needs an antiseptic. But I've seen this. Salt burns.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Salt stings. Rub salt into an open wound. See for yourself. I've had it done. Salt irritates. And I've watched this. Salt irritates. But I've watched this man himself witness to somebody and pray to somebody. It's not been that long ago. And while he's praying, you can see that person irritated. If you don't want to hear the gospel, it irritates some people.
Yeah.
As Jesus said in Matthew 10:32, they hated me, and they'll hate you. Salt penetrates. Try putting a teaspoon of salt in a whole gallon of water. Let it mix in there. Take one drink and it'll all taste like salt, the whole gallon. So it penetrates. So if you're here in church today and you're saved, you're the salt. And if we're all here as Christians, we're the salt. We're just salting each other. I thought about this last night, and it's likened to this church as a salt shaker. It's holding the salt. But Jesus didn't say that we're salt to the church. He said we're salt to the earth. So the salt shaker has to be turned upside down and let the salt out. And that's for myself. That's me teaching myself. I need to get out of the salt shaker. Jesus said in Matthew 5:3, if salt loses its saltiness, it's good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under the foot of men. I'll tell you this. They got this after doing a little bit of a study where the salt comes in at. In these times, they got their salt from the Dead Sea. If that salt laid around a little bit too long and started coming in contact with elements, rain and whatever, that zestiness begin to leave that salt, and it would leach out. And once the rain and elements continued to pound upon it, it was no longer of any use. Matter of fact, it became poisonous. If you put it in the field, it killed your crops. If you put it in your well, it contaminated your water. So one thing they did with it, that they figured out, they took all that salt without savor, without any zestiness to it, and they put it on the roads. The reason they put it on the roads is because it packed in, it gathered up moisture, packed in real tight, and it killed the weeds. That's where that part of the scripture comes from. And I'm going to leave with this. The only point I'm trying to make is if we as Christians